I was never supposed to work the night shift. I had always been the daytime receptionist at the Silent Oaks Motel, a rundown roadside stop, barely managing to stay in business. My shift was simple: check-ins, check-outs, and handling the occasional lost key. At 10 p.m., I was supposed to clock out, go home, and forget this place until morning. That was the routine. That was how it was meant to be. But that night, something changed. Pete, the old manager, called me into his office just as I was gathering my things. He didn't look at me right away, just fumbled with a set of keys on his desk. His fingers trembled slightly as he pushed them toward me. "You're staying tonight," he muttered, his voice oddly flat. I frowned. "Why?" Pete finally met my eyes, but there was something off about his expression, something vacant, like he was staring through me rather than at me. "The night guy didn't show up. You're the only one who can do it." His tone was firm but distant, like he wasn't really there. I opened my mouth to protest, but the words never came. Pete's stare was unsettling. There was no frustration, no annoyance, just a blank sort of expectation, like he already knew I wouldn't argue. It sent a chill through me. I hesitated. The motel felt different at night, heavier, quieter in a way that didn't feel peaceful. I could already feel that silence creeping in. But what choice did I have? Before I could think of a way out, Pete grabbed his coat and walked out the door. Just like that, I was alone. By 10:45 p.m., I was sitting at the front desk, staring at the outdated lobby decor. The motel felt different. The same cracked tiles, the same faded wallpaper peeling at the edges, but now everything seemed more alive in the worst way. The walls cracked, not randomly, but in a slow, rhythmic pattern, like the building itself was breathing. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed with a dull, electric hum, flickering just enough to set my nerves on edge. I leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. It was just another shift. Just a few more hours, and I'd be out of here. I had to kill time somehow. The old wooden desk had a few drawers, so I started pulling them open one by one, sifting through the clutter. The first drawer held nothing but crumpled receipts and an old motel guest book covered in coffee stains. The second had a stapler and a few loose papers. Then I reached the bottom drawer. It was already open, just a crack. I frowned. I didn't remember seeing it open earlier. Slowly, I pulled it all the way out. Inside, there was only one thing: a tape recorder. It was old, one of those bulky plastic-cased models from decades ago, its once white surface now yellowed with age. A cassette was already inside. The label was faded, the ink smudged, but I could still make out the words written in shaky, uneven handwriting: "Do not erase." A strange feeling crept up my spine, cold and unwelcome. I wasn't sure why, but I suddenly didn't want to touch it. The drawer had been slightly open, like someone had left it that way on purpose, like they wanted me to find it. I sat there for a long moment, just staring at it. Then, against my better judgment, I reached out. My fingers barely brushed the plastic when a gust of cold air rushed past me. I jerked back. The motel door was still shut. The windows were closed. There was no draft. I swallowed hard. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs, but my curiosity was stronger than my fear. Slowly, I pressed play. The tape whirred, the static crackling through the speaker before a voice emerged. Low, strained, exhausted. The voice in the tape is speaking now. "If you're listening to this, that means you're on the night shift." The voice was male, tense, like he was holding back something worse than fear. "I don't know how much time I have left, but if someone else gets stuck here, maybe this will help." A pause. The silence between his words felt heavier than the static. "There are things in this motel at night, things that shouldn't be here." Another pause. The kind that makes you hold your breath. I didn't know the rules. I had to learn the hard way. Then, 3 slow knocks were heard from the tape. The voice on the tape trembled. The first time I heard the knocking, I thought it was a guest. I gripped the desk. It was past midnight. I went to the door, my stomach clenched. A man was standing outside, pale, tall, wearing a suit. I felt a pulse in my throat. The voice continued. I asked if he needed a room. He didn't answer. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as if all the moisture had been sucked out of the air. A cold feeling crawled up my spine, making my skin prickle. Something about him felt off. Not just the silence, but the way he stood there, unmoving, like he was waiting for something. I should have shut the door. I should have walked away. The thought screamed in my head, a desperate warning, but my hand stayed frozen on the counter. My feet didn't move. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fear. Either way, I didn't turn away. Instead, I met his eyes, dark, unreadable, like staring into an empty void. Something about them made my stomach tighten. Still, I forced my voice to stay steady. "Do you need a room?" I asked again. He didn't respond, not with words. Instead of answering, he smiled. But when he smiled, it wasn't right. It was too wide, stretching unnaturally across his face. His teeth were too sharp, too white, almost glistening under the dim motel lights. It wasn't the kind of smile people gave when they were happy. It was something else. "Something is wrong." He stepped forward. I stepped back. He kept coming, his gaze locked onto mine. A slow, deliberate movement, like a predator sizing up its prey. I stepped back again, my hand brushing against the edge of the counter. He stepped in, too close. Suddenly he was inches from my face, so near I could see the fine cracks in his lips, smell the faint metallic scent clinging to his breath. That grin never wavered. His teeth looked sharper now, as if they had grown in the space of a second. I didn't think. I just reacted. I slammed the door shut. My heart pounded as I locked it, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. For a moment there was nothing. Silence. Maybe it was over. Maybe he had walked away. Then, scratch. A slow, deliberate sound. Scratch. Like nails dragging against the wood. A whisper of a noise, but somehow louder than anything else in the stillness of the night. And that's when it hit me. If someone knocks after midnight, don't answer. That's rule number 1. That's when I learned rule number 1. I thought it was over. I sat behind the counter, heart still hammering, ears straining for any sound beyond the hum of the motel's old ceiling fan. The clock on the wall ticked away, each second stretching longer than the last. Then, at 1:33 a.m., the phone rang. The sudden noise nearly made me jump out of my skin. My pulse spiked. The motel phone rarely rang at this hour. And after what had just happened, I should have ignored it. But I didn't. I answered. That was my second mistake. The moment I lifted the receiver to my ear, I knew something was wrong. The voice on the other end, it sounded like my mother. My stomach dropped. My mother has been dead for 5 years. The voice was soft, distant, layered with static like an old warped cassette tape. "Hello?" I whispered, throat tightening. There was a pause. Then, she said my name, again and again and again. Each time, the same tone, the same inflection. It wasn't a conversation. It wasn't even real. Like a recording stuck on a loop. I gripped the phone tighter, knuckles turning white. My breath came out shaky. Then, the voice changed. It dropped lower, slower, and said, "Let me in." A chill ran through me so fast it felt like ice water had been poured down my spine. I hung up. My hands were shaking as I dropped the receiver back onto the cradle. The phone rang again, and again, and again. Each time, the shrill electronic wail cut through the silence, clawing at my nerves. I didn't pick up. I didn't have to. Because now I understood. If the phone rings after 1 a.m., don't answer. That's rule number 2. That's when I learned rule number 2. The night dragged on, each second stretching into eternity. The silence pressed down on me like a weight, thick and suffocating. I sat frozen behind the desk, too scared to move, too afraid to even shift in my chair. Every sound, the distant hum of the vending machine, the creak of the old motel walls, felt magnified, unnatural. Then, at 3 a.m., the TV flickered. The screen, dead and dark just a second ago, flashed to life with a burst of static. A crackling, broken hiss filled the air, making my skin crawl. I hadn't touched the remote. No one had. But the TV turned on by itself. My breath caught in my throat. The old motel television wasn't even modern. No automatic power on, no smart features. It should have stayed off. But it didn't. At first, I thought it was just static, the white noise swirling in random chaotic patterns. Then the image sharpened. It was the motel security footage. I frowned, my hands gripping the edge of the desk. The cameras were meant to show the parking lot, the hallways, the back entrance, standard views for security. But something was wrong. The cameras, they weren't showing the parking lot. They weren't showing the hallways either. They were showing me. Not me sitting at the desk. Me standing outside, staring at the front door. A sick feeling spread through my chest, my body locked up. I stopped breathing. It was live footage. I was watching myself. But I was here. I was inside. I wasn't outside. The me on the screen was completely still, standing in the dim glow of the motel's neon sign. My head was tilted slightly downward, my arms limp at my sides. But my face was nothing but a blur. And then, the me on the screen started smiling. A slow, deliberate grin stretched across its face, too wide, too unnatural. Teeth glinted in the dim light. My stomach twisted. My pulse pounded in my ears. I wanted to look away. I needed to. But I couldn't. My eyes stayed locked on the screen, unable to tear away from the sight of myself, of something that looked like me, grinning like a hungry predator. That's when I learned rule number 3. If the TV turns on by itself, don't look at it. By the time 4 a.m. came, I was already a wreck. My hands were ice cold, my legs numb from sitting in the same position for hours. My entire body ached with exhaustion, but I didn't dare close my eyes. The motel was silent again, but it wasn't the comforting kind of silence. It was the kind that felt wrong, like something was waiting just out of sight, just beyond my reach. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I could make it to sunrise, this nightmare would end. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. I heard my own voice calling from the hallway. A chill ran down my spine so fast it left me lightheaded. It was me, my voice, calling for help. Help me, a raw, desperate sob. Please. The sound of someone crying, my voice, my cries, echoed through the empty hall. It was weak, trembling, broken, begging. It sounded like I was dying. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. My legs felt like they had turned to stone, refusing to move. I wanted to run, to find the source of the voice, to help. But I was sitting right here. I knew it wasn't real. But my voice kept crying out, and it lasted for minutes. Agonizing, torturous minutes of hearing myself sob and plead, growing more desperate with each passing second. Then, the crying stopped. For a moment there was nothing, a terrible, suffocating silence. Then, from outside the lobby, I heard the laughter, my own laughter, low at first, then growing louder, amused, almost gleeful. It sent an icy wave of fear through me, worse than anything before. I was confused, terrified, unable to process what was actually happening. I sat there, my breath shallow, my heart hammering. And then, I knew. This is rule number 4. No matter what you hear, do not leave the front desk after 4 a.m. By now, exhaustion had seeped into my bones. I needed to get out of there, but my shift dragged on, refusing to end. Every second felt like a lifetime. Then, at 4:45 a.m., I heard someone whisper my name, soft, almost gentle. My entire body tensed. It wasn't the harsh static of the phone. It wasn't the distorted, unnatural tone from the TV. It wasn't even the eerie mimicry of my own voice. This was different. It sounded human, familiar even. And it came from room 209. A sharp chill ran through me. That room had been empty for years. I knew that. The motel records confirmed it. The manager had warned me on my first day. The room hadn't been rented out since before my time. And yet, the voice had come from there. I should have stayed put. I should have ignored it. But my feet were already moving. I stepped into the hallway. The corridor was dim, the overhead lights flickering faintly. The air felt heavier than before, thick with something I couldn't name. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I moved closer, step by step, until I saw it. The door to 209 was open, wide open. Darkness pooled inside like ink, swallowing every detail past the threshold. But then, I saw someone standing in the corner, a shadowy figure, completely still. It didn't move, didn't react to my presence. I swallowed, my breath unsteady. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to leave, to turn around, to run back to the front desk and never look back. But something made me stay. I forced myself to whisper, "Who's there?" For a second, silence. Then, it whispered back, "Come closer." The voice was soft, barely audible, like a breath carried on the wind. My breath caught, my chest tightened. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. So I did. I turned and sprinted down the hall, barely aware of my own panicked footsteps echoing against the walls. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I didn't care who or what that was. I reached the front desk, gasping for air, my hands shaking violently. That's when I learned rule number 5. If you hear your name from room 209, don't respond. I don't know if I'll make it to sunrise. But I need to say this before it's too late. There's a final rule, the most important one. If you're listening to this recording and you hear breathing behind you, don't turn around. The sound of a ragged breath, not from the speaker but from somewhere close, right next to the microphone. Then, a loud click. The tape ends. I sat there, frozen. The recorder was still in my hand, but my fingers had gone numb. The room was silent. I didn't dare move. The words from the tape echoed in my mind, looping over and over like a warning I had no choice but to obey. My heart pounded so hard it hurt, but I forced myself to breathe as slowly as possible. Then, carefully, I reached for my bag. My hands were trembling as I stuffed the recorder inside. I didn't want to touch it anymore. I didn't even want to look at it. I needed to leave now. I grabbed my keys off the counter, shoved the motel log into a drawer without caring if it made a sound, and turned toward the exit. I was done. I was never coming back here. But then, I heard a ragged breath, right behind me. Every muscle in my body locked up, my throat tightened. I squeezed my eyes shut. Don't turn around. The words from the recording burned into my brain like a brand. My hands clenched into fists. I wasn't breathing anymore. Then click. The sound of the tape recorder. My stomach dropped. It had turned on by itself. I didn't move. I didn't reach for it. The static crackled, filling the empty space around me. Then the voice came through. But this time, it wasn't his. It was mine. I don't know how it got there, but I didn't think much, and I ran. And I never went back to the motel.